All right, so so we've been talking about phylogenetic trees, and so this is something that you might see on the test, my test, and also May 16th. And so this is an example of shared characters. You see how it says characters, and notice how it says outgroup right here. And so this has none of them. So when you're building the tree, and this would be a phylogenetic tree or cladogram, you can see something about this in the sense that it has nothing. So this is kind of like what we use to compare. And then this is pretty straightforward. You know how it's like, okay, yeah, well the vertebral column came first, and so everything after that, only the lamprey has that trait. The bass has also hinged jaws, so there's the next trait. The frog has 4 limbs, okay, but everything after the frog also has 4 limbs. You following me? And then amnion, which is like how you develop amniotic sac, and then hare, which is the leopard. And so this, if they ask you, or if I ask you to graph something like this, you do want to put them, like you do want to build a tree. Again, it can be a diagonal tree if you want. I like these trees probably just because they make more sense to me. But this means this. So remind me, every single dot is what? Yeah, it's a common ancestor. And so as we go this way, we're going from ancient time, sorry, I wish I had a writing pad, to modern time, okay? And so this is like a really crazy billions of years ago common ancestor, according to evolution. And so this allows us to see where these traits evolved. Notice that in this trait, we can't put hair here because that would mean the turtle has hair, right? So if we put hair with the amnion before the common ancestor, it means everything would have hair, and that's not the case. So if you did something like this, like if you look at this real quick, let me show you a few problems with this. So jaws is pretty straightforward. Lungs, it's kind of going down, but then all of a sudden you get all this weird stuff. What? Positive means they have it. Negative means they don't. And so I'll just encourage you to maybe practice this. I'm going to obviously show the answer here in a second for those who are in class. But just practice, like, how would you build this? So derived traits means new traits. And so you have, like, only the crocodile and the pigeon has a gizzard. Only the pigeon has feathers. And then mouse has fur. So, like, you can see, would you group these two traits together? Like fur and mammary glands, since they're in the same thing? Like, I would. And then keratinous, which means keratin, like the waterproof stuff that's in our skin. Lizard, crocodile, and pigeon has those scales. So how would you actually graph this? Well, let me show you just the answer. But it'd be cool to like pause it, try to graph it, and see what you get. Let's see the time. Yeah. Here's the thing that you should notice when you're making this phylogenetic tree. You have 2 right here. You have 1 right here. Like, all of this is easy. Hopefully this is easy for you. Like, this part, like, okay, yeah, this is just straight down. But this is kind of like the problem spot. Hopefully this isn't as much of the problem spot because they just evolve together, okay? But these are the problem spots. So what you do is you go from higher number to lower. If all 3 of these organisms, lizard, croc, and pigeon, have keratin scales, that's an ancient trait for all 3 of them. And then a newer trait is a gizzard, which only the croc and the pigeon has. And then the newest trait for the bird is the feathers, which the croc doesn't have. So what it looks like, I'll just show you the answer. You can kind of go through and like practice it and stuff. But what it looks like is this, possibly, if it works. Okay. So you could have done it multiple different ways, and like I know we were like building it like straight, right? But if you were building it straight, and I'm gonna mess this up. If you were building it straight, you could build it like this, and then like make like a little trait here. You see that? It doesn't have to be curved. Like it could be straight, and you could like wrote jaws here, and then this could, you follow me? Like that could have been straight down or whatnot. Let me erase that. And so yeah, everything has jaws, everything has lungs after the perch, everything has claws and scales. That makes sense. The biggest problem spot that people find themselves is like, okay, well, what do I do with this sort of stuff? This is where, and I'll just draw this for you on the board. Or I'll try to draw it on the thing. But right here, this is where you could have gone like this. Common ancestor, and then branching it like this. And right here, you would have wrote fur and mammary glands. You following me? And right here, you would have wrote keratinous scales. And then from there, I would just kept a straight line for the lizard. Go down. This would have been what trait right here? If this is the lizard, gizzard, right. And then I would have went straight across for the croc. And then I would have went down. And I would have wrote what there? Yeah, I would have wrote feathers and pigeon right there. And then right here it doesn't matter because they both, like, it's just monkey and human. So you could have written it like that as well. Okay? So there's multiple different ways to draw these. Usually they give you the template. But again, the outgroup is what doesn't have anything in common. These three, again, hopefully these three was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. The hardest part, and I want to show you this one, the hardest part is like, what in the world do I do when it doesn't go simple like that? And that's just an example of one. Again, you can flip any node. Any node you can flip, and it still be the same tree. Okay? So for time, let's go through speciation. Again, post a lot of videos online from this stuff. There's a lot of videos on the topic. All right, so speciation. We're going. Oh, I need to pause. So speciation, according to Darwin's theory, speciation has to happen. Okay. So on the Galapagos, Darwin discovered lots of different things. These are, y'all know what these birds are called with the blue feet? Yep. They have an awesome, like, funny mating dance where they kind of show off their blue feet to attract the other male. I don't know. People do that the same today with, like, Yeezys and stuff, right? Nikes. Yeah, I don't know. All right, so speciation, underline it. I'm going to go pretty fast here as far as, oh, where did my little marking thing? Oh, where did it went? Oh, that's going to be a problem. Speciation is... How do I not do this? All right, so speciation is the process right here. The process by which one species splits. So this is like a node. So what causes this to happen on a phylogenetic tree? This part right here is a speciation event, okay? And so we're talking about what happens when the node splits, all right? And so this is important in the sense that, yeah, you do need to know different ways speciation can occur. And so we've already talked about what a species is. A species can mate and produce what type of offspring? Like a donkey and a horse, can they mate? They can, and what do they produce? A mule, but can mules make more mules? It's like insanely rare, but it's possible, but it's insanely rare. And so what you have to be the same species is you have to be able to mate and produce fertile, viable offspring that cannot make more of itself. So, of course, diversity within a species, good old human beings right here. Similarity between different species. Look at these. These are two different species, but look how similar they look. And so speciation is really a kind of an interesting thing with that. So lots of different ways speciation happens. You have to have isolation, though. Isolation. Think about like quarantine. But isolation is when there's barriers. So there's different barriers when we talk about speciation. You need to understand the different barriers when it comes to speciation. So prezygotic barriers, which is before a zygote is made. What's a zygote? Fertilized egg. Good, Nolan. So it's a fertilized egg. And so it blocks fertilization from occurring because it doesn't allow this fertilization to happen. There's a lot of different ways prezygotic barriers work. All right, so it works like, so here's some examples. So habitat isolation, know these. Hey, star this. You have to know these. And this is pretty much a straight definition. Speciation is not by far the hardest part of evolution. But habitats, so you live in different habitats, which will prevent mating. Temporal isolation, which means you come out at different parts of the year or day to mate. And then behavioral adaptation, which is if you don't sing the right song or do the right dance, you are not mating. Okay? So, I'm not going to make any jokes. All right, so moving on. So the habitat isolation is when two species encounter each other rarely. So you have these two different flies. Yeah, one lives on different, yeah, there's blueberries. Murphy was just eating some blueberries. But there you go. Temporal isolation is when they come out at different parts of the year. So these skunk come out at different parts of the year. What was the skunk's name in like those Looney Tunes? Was it Sylvester or something? Sylvester, yeah. And then behavioral is courtship rituals. So again, there's our friends showing off their blue feet. And brighter the blue, more likely the chance of reproducing, and a higher reproduction rate means a higher what type of level? If you produce fitness, yeah. If you reproduce, you have a high fitness level. Okay. So there's also other ways of prezygotic barriers. For example, mechanical isolation, which means it just doesn't physically work. It just doesn't work. And then gametic isolation, which means chromosomal abnormalities. Like there's not the enzymes necessary to fuse. They don't like recognize each other. And all that is still prezygotic mechanism. So morphological, like anatomy differences, prevent successful mating, and gametic, which is like it can't fertilize the egg because it's missing the right enzymes, it has different chromosome structures, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so prezygotic barriers is that. Now postzygotic barriers is like, okay, we did produce a zygote, but what prevents that zygote from making more viable for offspring? And so this is important, start this. And so this is reduce hybrid viability, the ability to live, reduce hybrid fertility, which means they can't reproduce, and then the hybrid actually breaks down and dies. So that's just an example of post-zygotic. So here's some pictures here about that. So you have like this salamander that's like, it's kind of wonky looking. Doesn't really survive very well. That's a hybrid between two different species of salamander. You have the mule, the famous example of this, a donkey and a horse mating produces the mule, but the mule, it's like insanely rare for a mule to be able to produce another mule with it, you know, with itself and with another mule. So this is a problem. And then you can see the hybrid breakdown here. These are two different plant species. This is the hybrid, though. You see the hybrid? And let me turn off the lights. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see. But what do you notice about the hybrid between those two plant species? Yeah, it's crazy. What? Tiny, small. Do you think that allows it to have a high fitness level? When it's crazy small like that and struggling to survive. So that is an example there, okay? And that just kind of explains all that. Moving on. So these, I would know this, just in general, what this stuff means. These are reproductive barriers, okay? Reproductive barriers is when there is something happening that does not allow the species to mate or produce viable offspring. Okay? Moving on. So, grizzly bears and polar bears, like the biological species concept, emphasizes absence of gene flow. Gene flow is when genes flow through a population, but sometimes this does occur. Grizzlies and polar bears can make growler bears. Probably. I don't know. Maybe. There's a different type of species concept side. It's called morphological. And so this is sexual versus asexual species and does not rely on information about gene flow. But here's the thing. You always want to bring about gene flow. It's just different ways of thinking. How do species come about? We're talking origin stories here, which, again, we've talked about how evolution has a problem. And then ecological species defines in terms of a niche, which is like its role. A niche is, underline that word. We didn't really talk too much about ecology. We did it Sunday. We'll talk about more on the FRQ review. But a niche is like a job. Like, what's its job? What's an organism's job? And it's like address. I'm just going to write A. I'm not going to write that. Its job, its address, and how it interacts with the environment. And so for example, how do things interact within the environment? That's just an example of ecological species. So, moving on. So more than 20 other species definitions have been proposed. I would just note, for your test and for the test May 16th, you need to know those reproductive barriers. You also need to know these two terms, which are super important. Underline them. These are note cards waiting to be happened. This is a learning objective. Allopatric speciation and sympatric. Okay? So I like to think A for away, like they are away from each other, so they're geographically isolated. They're not near each other. Sympatric is when they're not isolated. They're in the same location. Okay, but yet speciation somehow happens. Okay, and again, speciation, a node. We're separating into two different species. We're no longer mating, and if we go back and try to mate after hundreds of thousands of years or thousands, it doesn't work. We don't produce viable offspring. So that is the definition of speciation. So here's a picture here. You have two fish populations. Y'all see the picture? And so over time, maybe some sort of like event happened, geological event, where we separated this pond. And so this is allopatric. Okay, these guys, different species. Sympatric means, okay, we still develop new species without separation. So that's just the definitions, the bare definitions of that. So examples of these, gene flow is interrupted. So the flightless cormorant, it's probably not how you say that, cormorant, of the Galapagos likely originated from a flying species of the mainland. Okay? And so geographic barrier depends. So for example, a canyon could be a barrier. There's a great example in a textbook that I want to kind of walk you through this, but mosquito fish in the Bahamas. Yeah, they have this example here. So let me show you a picture here as far as that goes. So in ponds with predatory fishes, the fish's head is streamlined, but the tail is powerful, like rapid bursts of speed. Okay? But in ponds without predatory fishes, this reminds you of what? What's the activity we did? Yeah, stickleback. Good. Yeah, we talked about the stickleback. So this is similar to that. And so in ponds without predatory fishes, mosquitoes have a different body shape that favors long and steady swimming. Okay? And so this is evolution in different mosquito fish populations based upon selective pressures. Okay? And so reproductive isolation may evolve when they are separated. So for example, when we become isolated, we could develop different behaviors. Okay? And so female mosquito fish prefer to mate with males that had body shapes similar to their own. And so that is a behavioral isolation, which led to speciation, according to science. Reproductive barriers can develop in lab populations that are isolated. So for example, this picture right here, starch versus maltose. So initial population of fruit flies, mating experiments afterwards. And so what these mating experiments showed is that raised on different diets evolved to digest their food source more efficiently and prefer to mate with partners adapted to the same food source. And so you can kind of walk through that data right there. But right here you can see the data. Numbers of matings in experimental groups. Male and female, starch and starch. You see that number? Compared to this number, y'all following me? They were raised on starch, they were raised on starch, they mated together versus when they were raised on different mediums. That's just an example of how behavioral adaptation works. Allopatric has also been observed in nature. The Isthmus of Panama. Panama Canal. Who built that? Y'all know that history? I mean, what president was Roosevelt? And so you can see right here, different different shrimps are just 2 of the 15 pairs of sister species that arose when this formation happened. So the color indicates the sister species. So you can see right here, sister species, but yet they are still, notice that we have a different species, genus species, right? These are all different species when it comes to these shrimp, okay? Sympatric means the same place or same country. So this is when, underline that term, that's important. So this is when gene flow is reduced and something happens when we're not physically separated that allows speciation to occur. Polyploidy, well, what does that mean? Multiple chromosomes. Good, multiple chromosomes. Habitat differentiation, y'all understand what that means. And we talked a lot, well not a lot, but we talked about sexual selection and how if organisms start selecting for a trait, that could lead to speciation when it comes to that. So polyploidy extra set of chromosomes, this is common in plants. I would underline that. Common in plants, rarely occurs in animals because usually that's a miscarriage. Tetraploids and all that sort of stuff. This is actually what happened to strawberries, to be honest with you. Skipping through these terms. Skipping through. Habitat differentiation. For example, the North American maggot fly can live on native trees, but also introduced apple trees. So flies that use different host species are reproductively isolated because they prefer different habitats. And then finally, sexual selection. Different colors likely contributed to speciation in cyclid fish in Lake Victoria. So you can see right here, normal light. How do they look at that? How do they see each other? So under normal light, females of each species strongly prefer males of their own species. But under orange light, females of each species responded indiscriminately to males of both species. So the resulting hybrids were viable and fertile. So what does this mean? So here's the conclusion. The researchers concluded that mate choice by females based upon male breeding coloration can act as a reproductive barrier that keeps the gene pools of these two species separate. So what they're saying is this. Listen, since these two species, you have to have separate gene pools evolving over hundreds of thousands of years. That's what it means. So if you have these gene pools, you have to have some way these gene pools change enough where if they come together, no longer can a viable species form. So here's the conclusion. Listen. Since a species can still interbreed when this prezygotic behavioral barrier is breached in the laboratory, the genetic divergence between the species is likely to be very, very small. So this suggests that this speciation event happened really recently. Okay? Yeah, Nolan. Did you come up with that like this early? It's pretty impressive. No, I'm not going there. Yeah. All right, so geographic isolation, we talked about that. Sympatric, again, reproductive barrier, some sort of reproductive barrier. Okay, so how long does this stuff take? I made this red for a purpose because, you know, being at a Christian school and believing in Creator God. Darwin, again, a lot of scientists are turning from Darwinian origin stories because it's too hard to figure out. So this appears suddenly. We talked about the Cambrian explosion. And so this led scientists to literally adjust what they're thinking and try to come up with a new theory called punctuated equilibria or equilibrium, which means this. Instead of gradual change, you have rapid change very quickly, okay? Because that's what the data says, right? Darwin expected his data to be supported in the fossil record, and actually, if you dive into the truth of it, it's not. And so what punctuated model is this. Gradual, this is Darwinian, so if you want to write Darwinian beside this, Darwinian is gradual change over time. Again, natural selection is very good explaining how change happens, not very good at explaining origin. And so gradual model, here's that. So over time, we diverge, change gradually. You see all the different colorations. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years here, millions maybe. But punctuated is rapid. Boom, something happened dramatically, done. And that is probably more accurate according to the fossil record. So that theory, I forgot who came up with it like 30 or 40, 50 years ago. But that's just like a new theory about how life comes to be. Okay? And so, for example, speciation rates. Punctuated pattern in the fossil record combined with evidence from labs suggests that speciation can be rapid. Underline that word. It can be. So the sunflower, I want to try to say that, Helianthus anomalus, originated from the hybridization of two different species and rapidly diverged into a new species based upon lab results. And there's that sunflower. Kind of looks like similar plants that we got on our beaches a little bit. So here is, and all the rest are just kind of examples that I showed you, okay? Yeah, how fast does speciation occur and all of that. So for, let me just ask you one question. Strawberry poison dart frog. And then I want you, and then I'll talk to you about stuff that you can work on for the last 20 minutes of class, give or take. Well, what time we get out? 10 minutes class? Yeah, like 13 minutes class. But here's the question, okay? Suppose that females of one population of strawberry poison dart frogs prefer to mate with males that are orange and red in color. In a different population, females prefer males with yellow skin. Explain how such differences could arise and how they could affect the evolution of reproductive isolation in allopatric versus sympatric populations. So one more time, I want you to think this out. We'll talk about the answers here in a second. I'll stop recording. But explain how such differences could arise and how they could affect the evolution of reproductive isolation in allopatric versus sympatric populations. So use the two terms we hopefully learned a little bit, allopatric and sympatric, and explain how sexual selection can cause reproductive isolation. Okay? Hope this video was helpful. If you heard Nolan's joke, it was pretty good. If you didn't, sorry.